insulated metal, blah, 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 blah. If I looked at the search term like women's pink rubber coated insulated water bottle, like that's my exact product. Now, the more specific you get to the product, the more specific the search is, the lower your search volume is going to be. So what we always look to do on product launches is like we try and find the intersection between good search volume and good to us is like maybe even a couple thousand, depending on the budget, that also have really good relevancy to the product. Because what you're trying to do is you want to get in front of your exact shoppers. So example would be insulated water bottle is going to be really expensive and not super specific to my product. Like it's kind of specific, but not really specific. I'm trying to say like, okay, where can I start getting super specific to my product, but it's going to have enough search volume that I can get the sales volume that I need. So I would focus more on that versus that I would looking at only search volume. A bit of a technical answer here is we don't quote move them, meaning we're not going to pause the existing keywords. We're simply going to launch them in another match type. Again, make sure to keep the bids lower. Amazon actually, if you read their recommendations, they recommend keeping bids lower on broad and phrase match, even lower than the exact match. When we would launch those is honestly really dependent performance of the account and availability of the budget. So if you launch a keyword in exact phrase and broad, so you have 50 keywords, right? And you launch them in exact phrase and broad, you technically have, 150 keywords that you've launched. And the potential of broad and phrase to spend could be quite high. So again, you just want to make sure it makes sense. It seems super simplistic, but if you are in a phase where you're struggling to control total ACoS and ACoS, to fix those two numbers, it really means that you have to lower down your ad spend with ideally little to no impact of the total sales or the ad sales in the case of ACoS. If you introduce a whole, again, those 50 keywords in exact phrase and broad, and those you probably need to test and optimize the bids, etc., you're introducing a lot of additional ad spend into the account. So you do want to be aware of that and be careful with that. So that's kind of a benchmark that we use. But overall, I would say, I don't know if I would have like a certain time frame or a frame which I would hold back on. It really is dependent on the performance of the account. Another good question, which best bid strategy for phrase and exacts when you move? So again, we don't really move them. We would simply launch them in addition. We like to separate them by campaign as well. Kind of gives us a little bit more control over, say, budgets for things. Now, as far as the bidding strategy, we're a super huge fan of using mainly dynamic down only. If it is a keyword that we want to ensure that we get impressions for, so for our launch keywords, for our main keywords, for anything we're trying to be aggressive with, we prefer a fixed bidding strategy. It's still going to be the same. It's still going to be pick highly relevant keywords. One other tip is pick keywords that fit within the budget of the account that you're launching. So for instance, if I have a couple $100 a day budget versus $50 a day budget, those launches are actually going to look a little bit different because I can't afford that many clicks on a $50 a day budget. Or if I had, a couple $100 or $1,000, I have a lot more room for clicks. So actually, you want budgets to play into your launch strategy. The other thing that you want to keep in mind, do not expect profitability on launch. This is a huge one. There's a lot of people that try and pull back and knee-jerk for profitability right out of the gate. That is not going to happen. The reason why it's not going to happen, and I'll tell you the numbers behind the numbers, is that ACoS is just going to be high on your product launches, and that is a function of two things. One, the aggressive cost per click you have to set to be able to get visibility in the beginning, and two, how low your product conversion rate is going to be, especially if you're launching without reviews. Those two things, once you start to be able to bring your cost per clicks down because you gain momentum or you're optimizing your bids, and then two, once your product conversion rate starts to increase because you're getting those reviews, maybe you're optimizing your listing a little bit more because you've learned more about your target market, that is going to help bring down your target ACoS. So those things, again, conversion rates is going to be low, high cost per clicks. That's actually like the nuts and bolts of why your ads are not profitable, and it's almost unreasonable to expect profitability in the beginning. And that's actually why, if you've ever had a product where you're like, no matter what I do, I cannot seem to bring the ACoS down, I'm struggling here, it's a function of that your conversion rate is remaining low and it's not improving, and your cost per clicks are remaining high and you're not able to improve them due to the market or something else. So again, I would still say pick highly relevant keywords, Also, make sure that whatever keywords that you have fits within your budget. Launch them. Aggressive, sponsored product, exact match, potentially sponsored brand video, exact match if you have the creative. Double down on that for a couple weeks and then start expanding from there. Hello, and welcome back to another Thursday 1 hour segment of Ask Junglr. This is the time, this is the place to show up and get answers to your most pressing Amazon advertising questions. Why do we talk about Amazon advertising on this segment? So hey, if this is your first time joining, first off, welcome. I know a lot of people also catch these replays. These replays are also available on YouTube and in podcast format as well. Also look out for more resources because I know that these are an hour, which is amazing. We already have some amazing questions rolling into the chat. And so I'll make sure that we get right into those. But yeah, I am the co-founder of an Amazon ad agency, which is why we're talking about ads, because this is pretty much all I do day in and day out for going on over 7 years now, probably a little bit longer if you really calculated it, which is fantastic. I can't believe I've been able to do this for so long. So the format of this is you use the chat boxes or comment boxes, wherever you're listening on to ask your Amazon advertising question. I'll pull it up on screen and we'll get right into it. By the way, a lot of times questions roll in last minute. So if you are watching, make sure you drop your comments into the chat because basically I have to skate out of here exactly at 1 o'clock today. Sometimes I'm able to go over, but today it's not looking like that, which means if you want to make sure you get your questions answered, drop them into the chat sooner rather than later. And with all of this, which is why I love not exactly fully interactive, but pretty interactive via the chat box, you can feel free to ask some follow-up questions. So oftentimes I'll say something like, oh, that triggered an idea. Like, how do you expand on this? Can you get specific with it? Absolutely can do that. And so we'll be doing that today. With that being said, Joseph coming in hot and heavy with a really strategic question here. Love it. Love the way Joseph always has some of, I want to say the most complicated questions, but some that really keep me on my toes. So Joseph, we appreciate you and appreciate you joining in. So Joseph's question today is, hey, how can I incorporate top of search placement calculations into my routine bid optimizations? Is that what you do? Or as a separate task, would you build it into the regular routine of optimizations? A lot to unpack here, Joseph. So I'm going to just work through sort of the pieces within your question. So the first question is, how can you incorporate top of search placement calculations into your routine bid optimizations? What I want to say is you definitely want to make sure that you're taking placement percentages or dynamic up and down bidding for that matter into your bid optimizations. Why is that? Well, it depends on how you calculate your bids. Now, if you don't factor in cost per click into your bidding strategy, like if you're not adjusting based off of cost per click or analyzing based off of cost per click, then you're probably fine. However, for us, our bid optimizations do factor in the cost per click. And by the way, if anyone wants to know any more nitty-gritties on bid optimization, I wrote our algorithm myself. Now it's definitely been optimized and updated over the last, I don't know, going on probably 5 or 6 years at this point, but I've gone way deep in the weeds in this. So the factor that you need to keep in mind when you do, again, I mentioned dynamic up and down bidding, placement percentages, anything that sort of will vary your cost per click and has the potential for your cost per click to be greater than your bid. That's where you run into issues, because if
technically speaking, your bid optimization sequence is saying like, hey, we need to lower this bid, but then it's going off of the cost per click. There is a scenario in which you could accidentally increase bids that you intend to decrease. So in this case, you need to be very, very careful. It depends. Joseph, you might be using bulk files. The best way that we found to sort of like adjust for this is you want to run some sort of macro, or you can create a formula or something that will basically take a look at what is the dynamic up and down bidding and what is the placement percentage of this campaign, and then make sure that you're sort of like applying those adjustments to the bid. I'll actually tell you, like, sneak peek into our formula, how we've done it is what we'll do is we'll calculate what we call like the adjusted bid, meaning we look at the dynamic up and down bidding, so that would be double the bid, and then we would look at the placement percentages. And by the way, you should never use dynamic up and down bidding and placement percentages in the same campaign, but heaven forbid if that happens, you want to make sure that you, whatever like your adjusted bid is, you like double stack it. So then my question would be like, is my double stack bid, or whatever my highest bid, if you're familiar with spreadsheet formulas, you would use the max. So you essentially calculate all of these, and then you say, what is the max possible like bid that could ever be entered into the ad auction, which honestly, that's not a bad thing to calculate, just to take a look. Like if you have that formula, again, it's not like hard. It is a little bit more complicated because you have a ton of nested formulas in your spreadsheet. Anyone familiar with spreadsheet work, it's like nested formulas can get bonkers sometimes, so it's one of those. Or you could just calculate it using additional columns, but that might not be a bad thing to say like, hey, do I have like a max adjusted bid that's like insane? Because there are some times where maybe you have like a $3 bid and then like a 200% top of search, like that could get really crazy really fast. So essentially we're calculating that into it and saying like, hey, where are like our high bids, or and then when we're calculating like our new bid, we want to be conscious of what are we calculating off of? Are we calculating off of the cost per click? Or are we calculating off of the bid? Now, like I said, if you don't have a crazy like increase, if you don't have a crazy up dynamic, then calculating off of the cost per click is not a problem. But if you have like this sort of dynamic increase involved, then you want to make sure you're calculating off of the bid. So that's essentially what we're doing, is we're just saying like, hey, where are we going to be making the wrong optimization decision, and make sure that you account for that in your optimizations. Now, your other question was like, do you put this as part of your bid optimization? Do you put that as part of your routine? I'll tell you when it makes sense to put this as part of like your bid optimization sequence. And then let's talk about where, my personal opinion, it doesn't make sense. So the one place that it may make sense to add this into, like, you know, adjusting the maybe more placements, less bid, and focusing more on that would be if you have like a single keyword campaign, specifically if it's an exact match. Because here you can be very, very confident that any placement adjustment that I'm using is going to be applied to this one specific keyword that I can like be very like it's very black and white. So that is honestly the only time I would recommend really leaning on placements to help with the optimizations. Now, where I don't recommend it be part of like your typical bid routine, there are some people out there, good friends of mine, by the way, so like no shade to them there, but they're always going to have differences of opinion. And what I found is that if you rely a lot on the placement adjustments and do a little bit less on the bid optimizations, when you have a campaign that has multiple keywords in it, especially when those keywords are on broader match types, broad match, phrase match, you know, expanded ASIN targeting, those kind of auto campaigns, the amount of control, like the control over where those increases in placements are going to happen, you don't really have any control of if they really will be applied to the keyword and what you want them to be applied to. My personal opinion, there's way too many variables in that mix, and We have found that just for us, performance works best when we mainly adjust bits. And so for that case, like I would say, like if you have your like strategic ranking campaigns, maybe you sort of, those honestly should be treated sort of as a separate optimization. Honestly, a lot of times the manual optimization, depending on how many of those campaigns you have, can often work best, right? But if we do everything manual, we're going to have a lot of things slip through the cracks. It's going to be way too tedious, hard to scale. And so in those cases, like some sort of routine but optimization makes sense. And then how often? So yes, we treated placement optimization sort of as a separate task. We do build it into the regular routine. We're checking them minimum once a week, probably more than that because we adjust bids more often than once a week. So loaded question, Joseph, which I always appreciate how detailed your questions are. We always get nitty gritty into the weeds, bring up some awesome conversations. So I appreciate it. And again, if anything I said there brought up a follow-up question, make sure you drop it in the chat. We'll get into it. People saying, hello, how are you doing? I'm doing very well today. Actually, I appreciate you asking. Hope you are as well. So happy that you're able to show up. I appreciate you joining. Would you please guide a detailed about PPC audit? What is the most efficient way of doing this? This is a fantastic question, and I'm going to have an out-of-the-box answer for you. Any audit that does not first start with a conversation with the brand and an idea of what the brand goals are, I'll be honest, is going to be doing the brand a disservice. Now, am I saying that it's not possible to see where you could potentially improve the advertising? No, there's probably some like things that, we know work best, right? In terms of like best practices. But here's how I've shifted over the years. So what I used to do is just get access to Ad Console, go through the Ad Console and say, there's a bunch of negatives that you need to add. You have too many ad groups in your campaigns. You're not using sponsored brand ads. You're not using sponsored display. Here's all the search terms you have that you're not yet targeting as keywords. Like just basically old school methods of audits are to go through all of think of it as what are my routine optimizations? What are the things that I know get the best performance for an account? And then you simply take that checklist and you apply it to that ad account and you say, are they doing these things? Are there these things present in the account? And then it's kind of like a yes or no, and then you check it off and then you share that with the brand. And while that's better than nothing, what I have found over the years is that that's not going to show you where you need to move the needle to the brand. So here's what we do now. We'll have a conversation with the brand and we'll get a really good idea of the struggles and the things that they are up against. Because one brand is going to want to optimize for profitability. Another brand is going to want to grow sales. Another brand might say, we just onboarded a brand and they're like, hey, this particular product used to be hitting these KPIs and we used to make this much sales. We had an issue. The product got suppressed. We haven't been able to get it back there. Here's an overview. Yes, we're dealing with profitability, but goal is really to grow sales, because if we pull back for profitability right now, we're just not going to be making that much money. And so we need to push for sales. So we got all the context of what the brand is trying to achieve. And then that audit needs to be looking at what in the ad structure is hindering it from achieving these goals. So if I know what products I'm focusing in on, if I know what keywords they want to rank on, I want to know, how do they gauge success? Is it through keyword ranking? Is it through BSR? What specifically is the brand looking to do? And then I can evaluate the ad account based on what needs to happen or what is not happening to then achieve those goals. And what we find is that when we can run the analysis in this way, you come up with way more out of the box ideas and strategies. You end up giving them a strategy that is much more actionable and strategic given their specific business goals. And it gets you away from the checkbox, because what I have found time and time again as I go through audits with brands is where most ad agencies are failing them is they're following best practices blindly, and they're not optimizing, or they're not creating really strategic strategies based on what the brand needs at that time. Case in point, I talked to, again, new brand we're working with. They have a bunch of different products, but they have some products that historically have made up about 80% of the total sales. Again, there's issues with suppression, so they're currently making up about 50% of total sales. To be able to grow advertising. Now, these top products still are the best converters. They are the ones that have the best, they're best positioned in the market to be able to push more for that growth. Because they were following, the ad agency that we're working with was following like best practices. They went through a really intense testing sequence with every single one of the products. And so instead of saying, well, this is where our ad dollars should go, and these are the products that are driving our sales growth, and the really sort of crafting the ad strategy, because ad strategy is just good ad spend allocation at the end of the day. So it's saying, where should our resources be going given our goals and where we are positioned right now? And so what the other agencies had done is just said, okay, we need to run the playbook, right? We need to test all these things. So what did they do? They launched a ton of different campaigns for every single one of the products. What happened? Ad spend went through the roof, performance went down. Again, right now they're pushing for sales, but you also have to have that profitability context in there as well. And profitability just went way down. And so it ended up doing the brand a complete disservice. Was that playbook that they ran for testing those products for growth wrong? No, but they were doing it at the wrong time, and they were doing it all at once, and it wasn't shaped by any sort of strategy. It was just a best practices checklist. And so what I would advise you on when coming up with any sort of detailed audit, right? Again, old school would be, what do I know works? Checklist, see if the brand is doing this. A better one would be, what strategies do I know are best when trying to achieve this specific goal? Which products have the best bet or should be optimized, or whatever the case may be, to achieve said goal? Then go into ad strategy in that checklist and say, what does the ad structure look like for these specific products? And then what is the brand doing this, yes or no? Where are the hits? Where are the misses? Where are the missed opportunities? Where are the things that they could be pushing further on? And that's what I would go through. And figuring out where the products are being advertised and the ad structure for that is difficult, so much so that we actually hired a developer and built like a custom app for ourselves that allows us to generate a report that literally took me like a year and a half to figure out how to build it. So I recognize that doing that sort of audit is much more time consuming and a lot more work on the agency end. But if you really want to do your brands a service, I would say it's well worth the effort. That was a long one, but I wanted to give you an idea of where I was now. But I definitely appreciate the question and hope it helps. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. How do you choose which variation to prioritize in advertising? It is a clothing brand with several variations under one parent name. Clothing. One of my I love to love them and love to hate those brands because they're so complicated. One, I would say you want to focus in on the best sellers is what we've done. A lot of brands, and actually this is something that could really end up hurting you down the road. If you have a product with a ton of different variations, I've heard some horror stories actually from brands we've consulted with, where the agency essentially put every single individual child ASIN into its own campaign. And what happens, sometimes things happen where something accidentally gets split out or split off. The brand essentially had an error and all of the variations got split, and ad spend like quadrupled overnight. It's insane. So you want to be very careful with how you're building it out. I would recommend focusing in on the best sellers. Now, if you have the data to prove this out, you can use business reports, or you can actually use the advertised product report, or the purchase product reports are going to be phenomenal for you in this case. And so what you want to do is, again, for any of our quote, what we call like generic keywords, which are non-specific. So the example I always give is like metal cup. I don't know if they want the blue one, the black one, the pink one, like who knows what they want in that case, right? So I'm going to put my best foot forward and simply advertise the best selling variations in that campaign for those main keywords. Pro tip here, if the brand is constantly having stock go in and out, instead of only picking the top variation, you probably want to pick the top 2, maybe even top 3, especially in clothing. Black mediums, historically impossible to keep in stock. And so you just want to make sure, because ads are retailer wear. So if your bestseller goes out of stock, all of a sudden all of your advertising shuts down. And yes, you may catch it, but it could take you like 24 hours to catch it. We would prefer to have absolutely no issues there. And so we'll keep the, top performers in the campaign. If you don't have any data to verify which one is the top performer, then what I would do is we put all the variations inside the campaign. Then we'll assess and then pause everything but the top couple bestsellers there. So that's what I would do. My pro tip here also, and something that works very, very well for these clothing brands as well, it's also very manual and time consuming to set up, but what we've noted is that the results are just so good, we continuously put efforts and resources into doing it, is any time you can find a variation specific keyword. So like, again, black mediums, pink cup for women, pink metal water bottle, like all of those things that are like very specific to the products. What you want to do is make campaigns with all of the variations that apply to those specific keywords. And that is really helpful to drive better conversions for the brand as well. Awesome. All right. Joseph coming in with even more questions. Let's get into it. Does an average 30-day or 7-day PPC report give you more actionable insights compared to the SQP report? I feel like the SQP data only accumulates enough data for one item that sells a lot. Yes. I just had a question with a brand. Somebody was getting into SQP, which is for anyone listening, which is the search query performance reports, and then saying like, hey, I looked at my search query performance and then I also looked at my advertising data and was like, oh, there's some things off here. The reason why is because I would say they're both insightful, but for different reasons. I would say, average 30-day or 7-day PPC report is going to give you much more actionable advice when it comes to like ad optimizations or which search term, do I get the most impressions or sales through. I think that's going to be very helpful. Excuse me, where search query performance is insanely like where you cannot get the data anywhere else, and it's like amazing, is the fact that you can figure out how you benchmark against the competition. That is where search query performance reports absolutely shine. And so what I would recommend doing here is taking a look at the average conversion rate. So to get the averages, what you'll do is you'll look at the totals. You know how there's that total column and then there's your brand. You want to look at the total orders versus the total clicks on that search query. And then what you want to do is just say, okay, now what is my brand, conversion rate? What is my brand click-through rate? So for clicks, it would be, the clicks divided by the impressions, or I forget what it's called in search query performance, but essentially like people seeing the product versus clicking on it. I want to know how I stack up against my competitors down on a specific search query level. That's where it's like, oh my gosh, mind-blowing, amazing data that you can't get anywhere else. The reason why like orders aren't that actionable is because search query performance report does not record all orders. So your advertising data is going to show on things like, product pages, any product page placements. It's going to look back over the last 7 days and see like, hey, has somebody made a purchase in the last 7 days? Then it'll report those. What else? It doesn't include like, how there's the carousels on the search page that basically say like 4 stars or above. We all know that they're actually advertising placements. Those are not counted. Sponsored brand ads are not counted. And search query performance report only records orders that happen within 24 hours of the click. So it's last 24 hours of data versus advertising has a much longer look back window. So all those things combined mean that the data, like, this is what happens in Amazon all the time. They'll release two different reports and you'll try and analyze them next to each other. And you'll be like, wait, this data seems wrong. So whenever it's first party data, it's not that it's wrong. It's just that it's calculated differently. So whenever I see a report that doesn't seem to match up, I always want to know, how is that report calculated? How does it pull this information? And how does that differ from the other report? And then that will lead you to like understanding the reports better. So I would say it's not that one is more insightful, it's just they will tell you different things. And when you have low data, what we do is we always, like, if it's a variation listing, we'll always look at like the top traffic variation, because that will give you like more data. So that's what I would look at there. All right, another one. Amazon Arbitrage Kings. Welcome, King. What is your thoughts on using sponsored products bidding on branded keywords with up and down campaign bidding strategy? Interesting. So I will preface this by saying I'm not a huge fan of a dynamic up and down bidding. So I am biased. My answer will be biased. That being said, I don't really have a problem with it if your goal is to drive traffic. My thing is I'm not really comfortable with, or I really don't want to lose money on my branded keywords. Like, I don't want to have to lose money to retain a shopper that I already should be retaining. And so for that case, because dynamic up and down bidding can often increase your cost per clicks, that can lead to potentially having super high A costs or a loss on those campaigns, which I don't really want to do. And so for that reason, I would say proceed with caution here. If you really want to be more aggressive with your branded, then it makes sense. I mean, like, if you have a competitor that's like hounding you and going after you, then yeah, maybe just try and dominate them. But as a general rule, I tend to run these for profitability. And what I found is that dynamic up and down bidding doesn't always necessarily bring better profitability. So possibly, maybe proceed with caution. Good question from Joseph. Are you submitting changes via Amazon API or bulk files? How can I get access to API to submit PPC changes? Yes, Joseph, so we're using both. This is getting slightly out of my depth, although it's something that, because I'm not a developer, I at one time was like, oh, I would love to like learn how to code things and SQL and everything. I have enough to know sort of how to talk about it. We do have a developer on staff now, and so if you have any specific questions, I'm more than happy to like ask him about it. Historically, there's two different APIs. There's the ads API, which is the one that you use to submit like the updates and, you know, pull data as well. But if you're talking about using it to make changes, and then two is the SP API, or the one that you can use to pull like total sales and things. Ads API is actually not that hard to get a hold of. Now, we are part of the what is it called? The Amazon Partner Network. We got registered with them. And so through them, it's actually like super easy to get access to the Amazon Ads API. SP API is like really weird, and to be honest, I still don't even know how we got access to it. My developer basically just like found how to submit and get access to it, which is kind of funky. But I would say you essentially have to research online like where to submit to get access to the ads API, and then you have to tell them like, hey, what is your purpose of doing it? For us, we're not making a software that we're going to ever share publicly. It's always going to be like an internal software. I don't intend to become a software development company. So for us, we're just like, hey, it's for internal stuff, and it was pretty easy to get access. The hard part is not getting access necessarily. The hard part is figuring out how to set up the database and pull the data, house the data, push to the API, make sure that all of that, and again, that's a whole world that I don't personally deal with, but I could get you answers if you needed it. I just have to ask my developer. Right. Do you have any insights on what specific strategies work for the grocery category on Amazon? I tried using purchase remarketing audience to catch repeat purchase customers, but it didn't work well. Good question. So the one thing I would say if you have a repeat purchase category is historically a lot of times cost per clicks are really high due to the repeat purchase nature because the average order value, or not the average order value, the average lifetime value of a customer is really high. And so a lot of times your competitors are willing to lose out on the first order because they know that there's going to be multiple orders after that. So what I would say is make sure you have subscribe and save. That's first and foremost. Also track if you're increasing subscribe and save. That will be super helpful to like gauge if it's worth it to sort of lose out on the first order. And then the other thing that I would say is as you get those repeat purchase orders, people coming back to purchase from your brand, those repurchase from Scribe and Save, a great way to track how your ads are tracking with this is going to be looking at your total ACoS. Most times in these particular accounts, ACoS is terrible, really high, and total ACoS can be really, really great or really low. And so in that case, I would look at those KPIs to like gauge how effective your advertising is being. That will give you context. And in terms of it really depends on the product. What I would say is that historically we have found remarketing and sponsored display to be a bit of a hit or miss. So I'm not surprised that you didn't see it work well. One thing I would say is definitely test what look back windows you're doing. And also you can test, so kind of think like, how often would someone repurchase for me? So do I have like a 30-day supply? Do I typically have like a week supply? Do I have a 3-month supply, right? Repurchases, you can actually go all the way back to a year. So we had somebody where we were consulting with, and they had a product that they said, oh yeah, typically like this is for a vacation, and a lot of times people will repurchase this every year. I was like, oh, did you realize that in your repurchases, remarketing, sponsored display ads, you are retargeting people like 30 days? Like, why don't you try seeing if it's like a year or over a year, and if you can get better, better performance if you do it that way. Right. So you also want to take a look at like the life cycle of the product and keep that in mind. But what I would say is if you've tested the life cycle, if you really haven't found that work, then I really wouldn't sweat it. Like I said, for us, it can be a hit or miss on sponsored display ads remarketing. I would more just look at what search terms you find work well, like just the traditional things that work really well. So what search terms work best for me? Do I perform best on product pages? Auto campaigns work, like all of those kind of things. And then I would just look at it for the lens of, am I getting more subscribe and saves? Is my total ACoS going down? Do I have a good repeat purchase rates? And then that would be helpful to see if what you're doing in the advertising is effective, is how I would gauge it. Question. Also, how do you feel about running a single campaign with multiple ASINs of the same type of item, all match types, exact phrase broad, enabled by placements set by 25 to 30% top of search? No, I do not feel good about this. I'll clarify how I would adjust this strategy and maybe why I wouldn't recommend this type of thing, or the pitfalls that you can run into. One, so if you set a single campaign with multiple ASINs of the same type of item, are these child variations or are these separate listings that you're putting all in one campaign? If they're child variations, I don't necessarily have such a big problem with this. Now, I would definitely start pausing things that are not converting well or not performing well, because you don't want to keep spending money on something that's not working. Think of, this is the way we view parent-child relationships and how to group things in campaigns, is you can think of your listings like landing pages. So a classic, like good examples, outside of Amazon for advertising is like, hey, look, we're going to drive ads to this landing page, and then you look and see how the landing page converts and how that traffic source going to that landing page is performing. It's essentially the same thing if you group in parent ASINs into a campaign. So I can see the campaign and how that's performing, and I can see the performance at the keyword level. But at the keyword level, I don't know which product that traffic went to. I don't know what landing page it went to. So when there's that like interaction with the products and somebody purchases, did my ad underperform because it's going to the underperforming listing? Or did my ad underperform because that keyword doesn't work well? And then does that keyword work well for that particular product, or is it for another product? And if it does work well and I want to drive more traffic to this specific listing, or stop driving as much traffic to this other listing, I lack that control. I can't do it. So in terms of setting it up in the traffic, yeah, you're going to get the traffic, but you're really hamstrung when it comes to optimizations. So that would be my first issue with it. And again, it depends. If you're saying a bunch of variations on one listing, I have less problem with it. If you're saying it's a bunch of like products, I would have a pretty big problem with it. And your second one is, what about exact phrase and broad keywords? Well, here I also have an issue for kind of two reasons: control, and mainly control. And so my issue would be, okay, say I have a broad match that's triggering a search term that I need to eliminate. Well, what happens when that search term is also performing well in an exact match keyword in that very same campaign? Well, if I add the negative to the broad match, I'm going to essentially pause that exact match. So either I have to let the broad match run and just be okay with getting clicks on something that doesn't make sense for the broad match, or I have to add it and then completely eliminate the exact match. You see, you ended up with these issues. Or an example would be, maybe my exact match keywords are performing phenomenally, and so I want to push more ad spend here to be able to rank on them. Well, if I push more campaign budget, or I increase the campaign budget, is that new budget going to go to the broad match, the exact match, the phrase match? I don't know. I have little to no control over where Amazon's going to distribute that budget. So you end up with that whole issue. So I would not group match types into a campaign. And then the third one, you're saying on top of all this, we're going to put placement. Yeah, I don't like placement percentages on broad and phrase. Sometimes we can if the performance is there. And again, with all the different products being grouped in here, with all the different match types being grouped in here, and adding a placement percentage, just like that placement is going to increase a ton of different like cost per clicks on across a wide variety of search terms and landing pages. Like it's too risky, and I have so much little control over like when I see something working or see something not working to try and go in and optimize it. It's sticky here, so I wouldn't recommend it. Loaded question from Joseph. How can you make a client satisfied when PPC is only a part of the puzzle? You can have the best strategies, but if your competition heats up, if your star rating drops, then your PPC metric worsens. Yes, it's really about open communication. And making sure. So the one thing that I find all of our clients really appreciate is having an extra pair of eyes and an extra perspective on how their products are performing or how their account is performing. So you want to be able to get really good at understanding, finding, and articulating the why is this happening answer. And so that's what I would say. The other thing, it does kind of also go back to just making sure you're working with good brands. If there is a brand that whenever you say something like, hey, all of our competitors are doing this, or hey, I feel like we could optimize our listings a little bit, or you give advice, they're like, oh, no, that's not a problem. And they refuse to kind of adjust anything. In that case, I would say we will prefer a more collaborative effort with our brands, and those ones are historically hard to collaborate with. All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. Much appreciated. You are very welcome. All right. I'm going to try and get through these rest of them because we got some fantastic questions in the chat. Got about 20 minutes left. So if you got a question, make sure you drop it. What are your most important KPIs we have to check when priority if we get a running account? Good question. So I would say priority is going to be, one, it will be shaped by what the brand goals are. That's what all has to stem from goals. For example, if when it comes to setting goals, by the way, make sure they're measurable and actionable and you're on the same page with how you're going to track them. So for an example, if a brand says, hey, I want to increase sales. Say, okay, by how much? Are we looking at a 10% or are we looking at a 20? Oh, I want a 10% growth. Okay, great. We want 10% growth. What date ranges are we looking at? This is something that I have seen so many times. They'll say like, hey, we want a 10% growth. I'm looking at month-over-month growth. The brand is looking at year-over-year growth. Like, or we're looking at year-over-year growth, meaning like, what did we do this September versus last September? And then the brand is saying, oh, I'm looking at what we did, August versus September. So you're going to be looking at different things. So I would say it really depends on like, make sure you 100% get on the same page with the brand on what they want to track, how they want to track it, right? And then make sure you're setting good expectations. So once you have that, then really my question is, one, what KPIs are going to tell me if I'm tracking towards my goals? Like, leading measures and lagging measures. So for example, sales, it's kind of a lagging measure. Leading measures, meaning the things that go into making sales, are things like traffic, conversions, and price point, right? So I want to track those things. And as far as just like, if I can give you general KPIs for Amazon advertising, I would say classics, right? We still want to track ACoS. Depending on what the brand wants, it might not be the primary KPI. By the way, if you don't think it's the primary KPI, but the brand thinks it's the primary KPI, you need to have a conversation because there's a disconnect. You're on the wrong page. Tracking total ACoS, that tells you how ads track into profitability, which can be super important. And then sales. So if I had to pick 3 or 4, I would say it would be sales, total ACoS / profitability, ACoS, which tells you how profitable the ads are. And then probably if I had a third one, I would say ad sale percentage, which is ad sales divided by total sales. It's basically like your organic to ads ratio. Those ones are general, really helpful. And then what I find is everything else, we do track it often. So things like sessions, conversion rates, ad conversion rates, and like say unit session percentage or total conversion rates, cost per clicks, all of those other KPIs are good. Click-through rate, right? But those ones, like for example, if all I optimized was, if I had no other data points and all I optimized for was cost per click, I could be running really great ads. I could be running terrible ads. I can optimize my cost per click so low that I get no impressions, right? If all I'm optimizing for is impressions, then maybe I'm spending too much, right? If all I'm optimizing for is click-through rate, maybe I'm turning off things that are driving high orders, but only because I have a poor click-through rate. So those numbers to me are like contextual understanding of how my ads are working, but they're not the things to optimize for. So if I was going to give you the things to optimize for, it would be total sales of the brand, ad sale percentage, total ACoS, on some level ACoS is what I would look at. But great question. Elizabeth, are there any updates or thought on the latest new update of the Amazon algorithm? Honestly, it's I don't know if there's been like there's constant tweaks and updates. Don't get me wrong. Like, so nothing is ever stagnant on Amazon. I would still say, regardless of all of the updates that have happened and all of the changes and everything we've seen over the last couple of years, it's still focusing in on where we're getting like good. If you're talking about ranking, for ranking purposes, or for order velocity, conversion rates, positive signals to the algorithm, click-through rates, good add to carts, purchase, all of those things. And all of those things have to be relative to your competitors on that search page, is what we found. So providing that you can maintain a competitive conversion rate and a competitive order velocity, you will still win in today's market. That, as like a North Star KPI, has not changed. What has changed is market competition and the amount or the lack the lessening of organic placements on search pages, which has led to historically just really, really difficult. I did a presentation yesterday was, and I was talking about like sales and driving sales through Amazon advertising. I'm like, look, growing sales on Amazon is not hard, especially if you're talking about through Amazon advertising. It's easy. Now, every single one of you watching this is going to hear that and be like, no, you're full of crap. Like, it's super hard to grow sales these days on Amazon. No, it's not hard to grow sales. What's hard is maintaining, being able to generate profits and growing sales. That's the hard part. That's the thing that everybody's trying to figure out these days as consumer behavior shifts, as Amazon's marketplace gets more competitive, as advertising cost per click continuing to increase. It's getting harder and harder and harder and harder to retain profit and still be able to get the same level of sales as you did even 3 years ago. So yes, that part's harder, but it's actually generating the sales is not the hard part. It's like, hey, run a ton of traffic through the search, make sure that that traffic converts very well, and you will see increases. It's just, can you afford to pay the amount of money it costs to run that traffic? That's the hard question. And if you can't, then you have to find out of the box ways to be able to drive traffic, through other sources that will also help you increase. All right. What is a better option for day parting? Using Campaign Manager to increase the percentage during specific hours, or using PPC tools that allowing the ad group turning on and off? I will say I like other tools. The reason why is because I'm not a huge fan of the way Amazon has set up their native rules. They're hard to set up, they're hard to adjust, and they're hard to see what you've done. And I find the whole interface super clunky, and it doesn't always work, and it's really hard to figure out, is this working, is this not working, and the way that I want it to. So here, I think external tools shine. Now, what I would say is that just the on and off versus the percentage increase. What we found is that if you really want to get into day parting, percentage increase it, like increasing the percentage during like peak traffic hours can be really beneficial. So I would say I prefer external platforms to adjust day parting. And then 2, if you're looking to save money, the on and off might not be bad. If you're looking to like push the product, then using placement percentage increase is not a bad idea. All right, what is your strategy if we handle a new account having campaigns with multiple ad groups, different match types? Yes, good question, Gilbert. Oh, I lovingly refer to these as Franken campaigns. All right, here's what I will tell you is if it is working, as much as it's going to piss you off as an ad manager that you're continuously going to have this like Franken campaign sitting in the account, if all of the performance, if it's performing really well, leave it be. Now, what I would do, and here is where you want to use Ad Console for this, I would look back on all time and pause the things, like if you have search, or like if you have keyword targets that never got any impressions, you can pause those. If you have ones with got enough clicks with no sales, or some that are just getting a couple clicks, like you can pause those. If you have products on there, like you have a ton of different products that didn't perform well, like you can pause. So what I would do is I would look at all the stuff that has never had an impact on the good performance of that campaign, and you can like weed all of that out. At least that will hone down what you have. And then in a lot of ways, sometimes you can like rebuild what's in, like all the good stuff in that campaign in a new campaign. What we found is that often is a hit or miss in terms of performance. So I would say is like keep the good stuff, weed out the stuff that you can if it's bad, and then just be very strategic and careful with how you optimize these when they're driving a ton of performance for the brand. Elizabeth, hope you're doing well. Any updates on the Amazon algorithm? Awesome. I just answered that question, Sunny. I would say I haven't noticed any. There hasn't been anything recently that I noticed that's been like a huge issue. Like I would say still focusing on conversions, order velocity, positive signals to the algorithm will get you really far still in today's market, even though it's more competitive. All right, Elizabeth, I have a question about bid ad placements. If we bid for a keyword, let's say 45 cents, and see a high ACoS, but notice that one of the placements in the position 11 has good conversions, would it be advisable to reduce the bid by 20 cents and boost that placement by 30%? Depends on your goal of this campaign. I would say if your only goal is to achieve a better ACoS, then that may be a good thing to test. Where I would say test it and try. However, if your goal is for ranking purposes, what we have historically found is that when you focus on a lower bid, even if you have a really high placement percentages, you don't really seem to have the same impressions and the velocity that you get if you focus more on increasing that bid and then driving, mostly focus on bid, less on the placements. What you can do if you're trying to get a certain placement, you can actually take a look at where that cost per click is for that placement and then see if you can adjust the bids that way. Again, if your goal is ranking, because for ranking, again, you just need that high order velocity, you need good conversion rates, so you're essentially just optimizing for like order velocity. But if the goal again is ACoS, then here you're being more strategic and probably a lower bid's going to make more sense. All right, good question here. How many budgets are required for daily PPC? How many days are required to become profitable as business? These are questions. Abdullah, you are not the only one. These are historically difficult to answer. All right, so here's what you want to do is, in terms of budgets being required, it is a convergence of a couple different factors. One being the market that the brand is going into. So for an example, if I'm going to target, like a really expensive supplement, that's going to need a lot bigger budget. The reason why is because the cost per clicks in that market are really high. So I need more budget to be able to get the amount of clicks I need to get the order velocity I need to really push the product on launch. On the flip side, there are some other brands or still marketplaces out there where your cost per clicks are like 20 cents. Here, my bid does not have to be as aggressive. And then as far as the budget, so you want to look at it through like the market lens. What is the market requiring? And then you also want to have a very frank discussion with the brand and say, essentially what you're asking is, what can you afford to lose? Like if you only have, say, I have 20 grand for my ad budget, and if I don't become profitable when I spend on, if I don't become profitable by the time this 20 grand is out and have my business self-sustaining, then I'm not going to be viable as a business. That is we need to be very strategic, very, very tight with that ad budget. Now, if you have a brand where they're like, I have a ton of products, I'm super profitable, I can essentially take these profits and be able to reinvest them into the new products. Well, in that case, I have much more runway here, right? So I still want to be profitable, but I'm not like, if I don't maintain at this certain rate, like I'm going to go out of business, right? Two completely separate strategies. So essentially you want to take like market conditions, look at what the brand can afford, and then you're doing your best to kind of create a strategy that optimizes for both of those. And then what you're doing is saying, what is my budget? Given how much the market costs, how many clicks can I afford given this budget? And then you're having a conversation on what that can look like. Now, how many days are required to become profitable is really more dependent on the product's conversion rate than it is the advertising. Can we run more effective advertising and get there quicker? Absolutely. Can you have much less ad loss if you have somebody who knows what the heck they're doing? Absolutely. Are you going to get more bang for your buck in terms of ad dollars if you have somebody who's more strategic in running it? Absolutely. Can the best ad manager in the world save a product that is running at 50% below the average conversion rates for the market? No. I don't care how good you are at advertising, you're not going to be able to fix a poor conversion rate. And so you essentially want to take a look at the market. Actually, Product Opportunity Explorer is a fabulous way to go and look at this, because you can look at what is the average. You want to look at like the average reviews. What is the price point? Like if we're coming in at a price point that's double what everybody else in the market is and no reviews, ads can't fix that. That's a misalignment of the product and where you are. So you just want to have a really hard, frank discussion. And you want to find a better way to phrase it. But be comfortable recognizing when there is a question that is impossible to answer. So the way I always approach these sort of really hard questions is by looking at, what do I know? What can I forecast? And then what are my unknowns? So my forecast is what budget, what can I get for this budget? What is the, where does my conversion rate have to be? What does my total ACoS need to be able to afford this? All of those things you can forecast. But what I can't do is say, when we launch this product, definitively, what is our conversion rate going to be? What is our cost per click going to be? We're going to be able to achieve this ad sale percentage at this date. Those things are variable. And so in those cases, you just need to be comfortable saying, hey, this is my knowns, this is my unknowns. Here's the forecast. Is this something you're comfortable with? And then you just have to have open dialogue. All right, how do you handle the PPC if the ASIN was #1 in the Amazon bestseller, but suddenly got out of stock, but with reserve inventory? Ooh, this is a rough one, Sunny. Do what you can. Do what you can. So the reserved inventory, typically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the ship times go out on that, which means the conversion rates. It's a crappy situation all around. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. So there's a couple ways to do it. It depends on how soon stock is going to be in. If we think that stock's going to be in pretty soon, we might take most likely conversion rates through the roof, total ACoS is through the roof. Everything's just not great right now. If we have stock that should be shipped in or should be checked in relatively soon, then we might be okay with maintaining that poor ad performance, because we know that that's going to maintain our ranking on some degree, and then we'll be able to pick back up a lot quicker when the stock comes in. If the stock is going to take a really long time to be checked in, I'll be honest, again, just crappy situation all around, then maybe we're optimizing a little bit more for profitability. Maybe we're not pushing ads so much. And then essentially when the product does get back in stock, you're going to have to go back. You remember that launch sequence you went through? You remember all those things you did when you first launched the product to try and rank it, get it ranked, get it to the #1 BSR? You essentially have to go back through that playbook. Where a lot of brands make misses is when a product goes out of stock, they expect so you do have reviews, you do have a lot of assets, you figured out your price point, you figured out a lot of things. Listing probably got optimized, all of those things. And so you're starting off on a better foot than when you brand new launch product. But do not expect when the product comes back in stock to immediately pick back up to where you were before. Ideally, it does, right? There are some products where they go in and out of stock, they relaunch it, the product goes back in, everything's back up to normal almost instantly. That does happen, but that is, I would say, it's not the norm. So you're going to have to essentially go back through that launch playbook. All right, let's see. Running up against time. All right, so let's try one of these. What is the best way to run PPC for a low profit product? 2 ways you can go about this. One, you need to find where you can get lower cost per clicks, because the reason why low profit products are just really, really difficult is because there's less money to play with. So you need to find where there's low cost per clicks, or what you can do is you can make sure that a lot of times in these cases, ads will be unprofitable, but you can get the total account profitable if you have a really good ads to organic ratio. So if most of your sales are coming through your organic, then that can offset any losses in the ads. And that's easier said than done, but those are the 2 avenues in which you can attack that question. All right, another question on negative keywords. If you run a campaign aligned with multiple ad groups, add search terms as a negative exact match, will that search term stop getting impressions for the entire campaign or just the ad group? If you add it at the ad group level, it will only stop the impressions for that specific ad group. If you add it at the campaign level, then it will stop any impressions for any of the ad groups in the entire campaign. All right, and with that, we are at time. So I appreciate everyone joining in today. This was absolutely fantastic. And so make sure that you are joining us again, same time, same place next week, and to ask more Amazon ad questions. And I appreciate everyone so much. Thanks so much for joining all. I will see you in the next one.
And that wraps up this episode of the Ask Junglr Amazon Advertising Podcast. I hope you found these insights and strategies helpful in your Amazon PPC journey. Remember, if you have a burning Amazon ad question that you'd like answers to, head over to junglr.com/live to join our next live Q&A session. Until next time, keep optimizing those ads and stay hungry.